Thank you for coming on this second day of Drupal Camp Alpe-Adria. It was a great night yesterday, and I think there are some. There are some people missing because of it. So I'm pretty sure they'll be back in the next session. So we're really happy with the attendance. So thank you all for coming, because we really made a good impression for this faculty. So that means that maybe we can host another camp next year at the same time. So that's the good news. About the t-shirts, I guess we'll be selling the t-shirts, I don't know, after the break at 12 a.m., I guess. We'll see if there are some left. For today, we have a special guest from, he's a Swiss guy from speaking region, coming from Munich, and he'll speak in English. And he's Florian Lorétan, talking about how Drupal will change the way we work. So a big welcome to Florian.
Good morning. You know what most people do on a Sunday morning? They sleep. And so I was kind of expecting to have much fewer people in this room, and I'm glad to see so many of you who actually survived the party and made it this early. I'm guessing that some of you might be tired. If you're very tired, go get some coffee and come back, because we have something that's really important to talk about. What is that? That's the future. The future, and more specifically, the near future and Drupal 8. So when we generally think of Drupal 8, what we think about is the code. You know, all the new functionality, the cool modules that we have. And it's a very interesting topic, and there's been a lot of blog posts, a lot of articles, lots of presentations that have been made on that topic. But I think that if I wanted to cover all the new things in Drupal 8, well, we would be here the whole day. So I'm not going to talk about Drupal 8, the software. What I want to talk about today, not the software, what I want to talk about is the people. You might have seen this picture before. This is from last summer in Munich at DrupalCon. I know that many of you were there. I was there. That's me. Kind of helped organize a little bit. And this is the kind of people I want to talk about today. People who work on a daily basis with Drupal in a way or another. Of course, there's a lot of different ways that you can work with Drupal. So what do you do? Who in this room is a developer? Okay, nice. Who here is a themer? The people who are in charge of taking what the developers do and making it look good. Yeah? Good. We have a couple of people. Who's a designer? Design. Yeah, the people who decide what things should look like in the first place. It's crucial. Who here is a DevOps? Who would consider them? Yeah, we generally think of them, the people in the basement, but no, that's not true. That's not true. They're really people that we need, people that we rely on, because our whole infrastructure depends on these people. Very important people. Who here is a business person? Yeah? The people who work on actually communicating the value that we are creating. Who's a project manager? One person? The person who's in charge of making sure that the developers and the themers don't kill each other. Yeah, we need these people. And last but not least, who's a site builder? Well, let's put it in a different way. Who does site building sometimes? Yeah, you know, I think nobody has a business card that says, "Hi, I'm a site builder." No, it's not a job title, but it's really something that pretty much most of us do at some point. And it's really one of those things that really brings special value to Drupal. We definitely shouldn't forget that. As mentioned, Drupal 8, there's a lot of material to talk about. I cannot talk about everything. So I'm going to focus on 7 key points that I think will make a difference in how we work with Drupal. And then at the end, I have one question for you. Some of you might guess what it is, but we'll come back to that later. Let's start with the first point, and this one is, it's a prediction. I think that with Drupal 8, we're going to spend less time installing modules. So let's take a look at the current situation. We have that very nice saying, there's a module for that. We're very proud of it, because it means that on one hand, no matter what it is that you want to do, there's probably someone who already created a solution for that. You know, that's great. That's a positive thing. And we see that over the past couple of years, number of country modules have increased tremendously. And I think, Jem, you mentioned 15,000 plus. I think the last number I have 20,000 plus. It's amazing to see how this is increasing. And so I think it's really true. No matter what you can think of, there's a solution for that. But this also means that there's a drawback. It means that whenever you have one specific thing to do, you have 2, 3, 4, 5 different solutions that are available. And sometimes, even if there's just one solution, well, you use module A to build the structure of your site, and then you want to use module B for the functionality, but module B does not necessarily integrate with module A, and so you need a module C that integrates with those two. And what happens in the end is that we have a lot more modules than what we actually want in terms of functionality, and we only use a small part of the functionality provided by the modules that we have. Now, as a result, a lot of websites from a module perspective look something like this. How is this going to change in Drupal 8? Well, we've got a couple new modules in Drupal core, and I think the decisions, the choices that have been made into what modules are we going to integrate into Drupal core has been done in a much better way than it has been done in the past. I think we have modules like views, like Path Auto, like the text editor, what replaces what was previously in Contrib, the WYSIWYG module. These are modules that provide some essential functionality, but they also provide the stepping stones to build additional functionality. And I think that means that on one hand, we can build a lot more with Drupal core alone. You know, I could imagine actually building a real site without Contrib modules. This is something that's unthinkable with Drupal 7. And secondly, I think that these modules provide a very solid base upon which we can build Contrib modules that are well encapsulated, so that we are not going to need to have 3 different modules plus one that integrates the other 2 together. So I think, in summary, we will probably be using less modules, we will be spending less time installing the modules, we will be spending less time looking for the right modules. Second prediction, and I know there's been a lot of talk over the weekend on this topic, is that all Drupal websites will be responsive. And now you might say, well, we can do responsive websites with Drupal 7. You know, the technology is there, we've been doing it for a while. The thing is that with Drupal 7, you can create a responsive design, but you don't have to. And with Drupal 8, when even your administration interface is responsive, then how are you going to justify to your clients that the public-facing part of the website is not responsive? You can't really do that. It has to be responsive. And the technology is there. In core, Drupal 8 core, we have the picture module, the breakpoint module. It even allows to have real responsive images that load at exactly the right size. This is everything, in terms of technology, everything is there. The point where we have some difficulty is doing the conception, doing the design of those mobile, responsive designs. The tool of choice that we have used so far to create designs, to create mockups, it's pretty often Photoshop or something similar. It's a great tool, but it has the drawback that when you're creating a design or a mockup in Photoshop, you're actually creating one specific view of your website for one specific page for one specific device. And this does not make it easy to really think responsively when you're doing the design, when you're doing the conception of the website. And I think this is the reason why a lot of designers are starting to do their prototyping work not in Photoshop, but to do it directly using the media that will be used for the final product. To really work with HTML5, with CSS, to create mockups. And this allows us to think responsively from the very beginning. A third prediction kind of goes along the same lines, is that we will have to create leaner markup and better structured CSS. The reason for that is mobile. And when you think of mobile, we think of fancy, expensive devices that have a good processor from a specific brand that I will not name. And that's very nice, pretty picture, but the reality looks more something like this. Cheap devices that are accessible to everyone, but which are unfortunately a little underpowered. It means that the time that it takes to render a web page does matter. And no matter what device you have, we have to face it, the bandwidth that you get on a mobile network, it's from far not what we idealize it to be. And it means that we really need to pay attention to that loading time to improve the user experience. Because people have those bad, terrible conditions, and they have also no patience. And so we really need to make sure that it's not only the server that's really fast, really scalable in the back end, but we also need to make sure that we are delivering something that feels fast, something that really, that's not a frustrating experience. So if we take a look at the way that we typically create a custom theme in Drupal 8, in Drupal in general, on one hand, there's the Drupal standard HTML. It can be the HTML that's generated by Drupal core, by the modules, or it can be something from a base theme, and then you have the ideal CSS. Let me clarify this a little bit. So the standard markup that we have, it's known for being quite verbose. It has lots of classes for anything you could imagine, and has wrappers for anything that you could imagine. It's very practical because there's everything you could use, but at the same time, it's kind of bulky. And that's a drawback when you want to send this, especially when you have a low bandwidth on a mobile device. And then on the other hand, you have the ideal CSS. The ideal CSS is what you would write if you had absolutely no restriction from the framework that you use. And the problem is that these two don't necessarily fit together. The standard approach of going about that is to adapt the CSS so that you have something that matches the markup that is being generated. It works. It's pretty fast in terms of process, but the problem is that you still have your bulky markup, and the CSS adapts to this bulky markup, and sometimes it gets, it tends to grow over time. It's not very maintainable. This can be a little bit problematic. The other approach, which a lot of people have been doing successfully, is instead of modifying the CSS, it's to modify the HTML that is being generated. And this is done by overriding the templates. What's cool about this is that when you override the templates, there is no performance drawback. You just swap the standard template with the one that you want to use. It lets you define exactly the markup that you want, and it means that you can use it with the nicely structured CSS that you would like to use. This kind of approach makes it possible to use concepts like object-oriented CSS. This is a whole topic for a presentation in itself, but the idea is that you can create very modular CSS style sheets that render quickly, that are easy to maintain. Bootstrap, the Bootstrap framework, that's a very good example of this kind of object-oriented CSS approach. So now you might be wondering, well, that's very nice, but what does this have to do with Drupal 8? How is this going to be different? Well, in Drupal 8, we're getting a new template engine, Twig. And what's nice about this, in comparison to the current engine, PHP template, is that Twig is really only a template engine. It does not let you put any kind of code inside the template. And this means that this better separation makes it a lot easier to deal only with the markup and to swap the markup easily so that you can have exactly the markup that you want. And this results in cleaner CSS. Prediction number 4. It's the PHP code that we write. It's going to become less weird. The way that we write PHP, it's something that's special, it's something that's unique, but in some ways it's sometimes a little bit too unconventional. For example, we have a specific pattern, the hook. It's something that for Drupal developers, it's totally, we use it every day. And it's a very practical pattern, and we use it for absolutely everything. The problem is that when you have an experienced web developer who knows some other system, maybe Symfony, maybe Cake PHP, maybe Ruby on Rails, when they look at this, they're like, what is this? Where's this, where's this function even getting called? It's very difficult to get your head around this just by looking at the code. And what they see is not a hook. What they see, it's a hack. It's a very practical one, but it's a hack. And what happens is that because of these kinds of things that are a little bit different from what everybody else is doing, we have this Drupal learning curve. We have this hanging in our office. It's kind of ironic, but there's some truth in it. That in the Drupal learning curve, it can be steep, but what's the problem? It's not the steepness. It's that there's a bump. There's one part in the Drupal learning curve where you just have to get your head around things that are working really completely different. And it means that it's more difficult to make Drupal accessible to experienced web developers. So to kind of solve this, to be less weird and less, weird can be good sometimes, but in this case, it's, you don't want to be so different unless you really have a good advantage. And so what we've been doing, some very smart people in our community talked to smart people in other communities to learn about what they're doing, learn about what they're doing that works well for them, and to learn about what works for them that could work for us as well. One of these communities that we've been in touch with is the Symfony community. And I think that it's very interesting, the collaboration that happened there, and what came out of that was not to rebuild Drupal on top of Symfony. Symfony is actually a a PHP framework. That's what most people know it as. But Symfony is also a set of components that can be reused independently from the framework. And so what we did, we took some of these components and put them in key places in Drupal core. And so this means that we are not rebuilding Drupal on top of Symfony, but we are using things like the HTTP request handler. This is something that has a huge potential for, just doing better things, and it's something that's very abstract. It's at the low level. And it's not something that, as a Drupal developer, you will be in touch on a daily basis. But the effect that it has kind of trickles up from the low level to what we use in our daily life. And it's definitely going to have a major impact. It also means that it's much easier to have parts of your website that work completely independently. And I've seen that there's a lot of development shops that do Drupal development on one hand, and then completely custom development using another framework that could be CakePHP, Ruby on Rails, whatever it is. And I think that now that we have these Symfony components in Drupal core, and that we have these good mechanisms to create things that are a little bit well separated, then we can really create some kind of hybrid project. And these shops who are doing both Drupal and custom development can do all of that with just one platform. This is a tremendous advantage. Prediction number 5 is that we're going to write more JavaScript. And we're going to write better JavaScript. Very good example of this is the in-place editor that made it in Drupal core. So the in-place editor is a module that lets you modify the content of the page without having to leave the page. Very, very cool functionality. And what I really like about it, it's the way that it was built. If we take a step back a couple of years and see how this would have been implemented in the past, well, of course, we would have used jQuery. jQuery was added to Drupal core in Drupal 5. That was 6 years ago, over 6 years ago. And jQuery, it's a great tool. And the way that it works is that, well, you have the HTML markup, the HTML page. And then when you have JavaScript enabled, you attach some specific behaviors and you attach some data to the markup to create, Ajax-y kind of things. The problem with this approach is that it works when you have simple things to do, and when you try to do something a little bit more complex, like an in-place editor, this turns out not to be very scalable. It turns out to be, it gets a little bit complex because everything has to go through the markup. This is a little bit weird. And so since we're dealing with functionality that would not work at all without JavaScript anyway, what we do is that instead of putting the markup first and making the data and the behaviors optional, what we do, we start with the data. We start with the structure that we have. And in Drupal, we have a lot of well-defined structures like nodes, entities, fields. And if we can use that structure directly, and based on that structure, using JavaScript, we can generate the markup that we want. We can attach behaviors. It makes it possible to create very well-structured, dynamic user interfaces. And this is not something that was built from scratch for the in-place editor. The in-place editor uses a very popular library called Backbone.js. Backbone.js, just put it in one sentence, it's a framework that lets you write code in the front end almost as if it was happening in the back end. And it takes care of the communication between the front end and the back end. The only thing that you need to have in the back end is a REST API, which we have in Drupal 8. So Backbone is really an established, kind of best practice pattern, not only for Drupal, it's really something that's used all over the place. And this combination between Backbone.js and Drupal 8 and all the features that it gives to us, it makes a very, very powerful combination if you want to build more interactive, more dynamic user experiences that don't necessarily rely on page reloading and that kind of things. The sixth prediction is that code-driven development will be the standard. Does everybody know here what code-driven development is about? Does anybody not know? Okay. So code-driven development, that's also one topic that's, it can get quite complex, but it's becoming easier. And the reason why we want to have code-driven development is that there's three problems: reusability, deployment, and collaboration that are difficult to do with Drupal because you do all your configuration in the database, and then you want to reuse that configuration in different projects, maybe. That's reusability. If you want to do development, staging, production kind of deployment where you really have some formal tests happening at each of these phases, you really need to have exactly the same configuration that's being used across these different environments. And finally, collaboration. If you want to have multiple people working on a Drupal site at the same time, if everybody's working on the same site and just changing things in the database, you lose track of who's doing what. And you end up with conflicts. And so the solution, and this is something that has been recognized many years ago, is to get the configuration outside of the database and put it into the code. Because the code it's something that we are very familiar with. We can version it, we can deploy it very easily. It's something that we have a much better control over. The tool that we used so far was the features module. And don't get me wrong, I love the features module. I've been a big advocate of using features, and I think that it has really revolutionized the way that people work with Drupal. But features also has its drawbacks. So if we take a look at a hypothetical website that you have, and you have all your configuration that you would like to export into code, then features is going to get you, 50% of the way. There's like probably 50% of your configuration that can be exported to code without any problem. Then there's maybe 20–25% more that you can also export. But these are things that were not meant to be exported in the first place. And so features has to do some tricks to actually get this happening. And it works most of the time. The reason why it's sometimes a little bit weird is because features was kind of grafted onto Drupal. It's not an essential part of the system. And as such, it can only do so much. And then with additional modules, we can export a little bit more of this configuration with strong ARM, with the context modules, that kind of helper modules. And most people stop at this point and say, well, the last 10%, I'm just going to change it directly in production on the live server. And the problem with this is that it means that we kind of lose the advantage of having a fully code-driven development, that you can really deploy everything in just one step, that you can test everything absolutely, to 100%. And you can do the last 10%. It just tends to be hard and tends to be about as much work as getting the other 90%. But this is still something I would absolutely recommend doing. If you're working with Drupal 7, it's absolutely worth the effort. But how is this different in Drupal 8? Well, in Drupal 8, we have configuration management. Configuration management is not just a module, it's really an entire system that is an integral part of how configuration is handled in Drupal 7. And this means that it's really a part of the process. It's not something that you do afterwards. What does it address? It addresses reusability of code. It addresses deployment. You know, there's almost no questions that are left open there. It also addresses collaboration of people on the same team that are working on the same project. And one very nice thing that we get out of this, translatability. This means that your whole configuration can be translated. It means, among others, that we're not going to need the IA18N module anymore. You know, how cool is that? So if we go back to our hypothetical case, you have 100% of your website's configuration, and all of it just gets exported to code automatically. You don't have to think about it, it just happens, and then you choose which part of that configuration you really want to commit, just the way that you choose which code files you want to commit when you're working with regular code. So this is a major change for how developers work, how site builders work, and really it's going to change how the deployment work. So DevOps will be very thankful for this point. Then prediction number 7 is that Drupal will be used for a wider range of projects. Looking at the current situation, at least in our worldview, everything can be done with Drupal. It's true, but we kind of suffer from the fact that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if we look at it realistically, there's only a set of these projects where Drupal is really the weapon of choice, where Drupal will perform better than any other system. And this is not going to be completely different with Drupal 8. We will still not be building real-time stock exchange algorithms with Drupal 8. But because of the bigger flexibility that we have with the system, it means that the types of projects where Drupal 8 will be the right solution, not only a solution, but it will be the right solution, this is growing. Having a real deployment system means that we can really go into the enterprise market. Having a system that facilitates the integration of custom code means that we can create a lot more very specific niche apps. I think we're going to see a lot more startups that are creating products based on Drupal. And this means that, well, the software is different, so it's adapted to more kinds of projects, but it means that we're going to be in touch with different kinds of clients, different kinds of markets. And Balas, you mentioned yesterday in your enterprise Drupal talk, a big part of working with the enterprise, and this is just an example, it works for any kind of client. When you're working with a different kind of client, it means that you need to have a look at different ways of doing business, different ways of managing your processes, of doing project management, also a different way of doing resourcing. So for those of you who raised their hands when I asked if anybody is doing business or project management, you might not be working with the code directly, but I think that Drupal 8 will also impact the work that you do. So for a little retrospective, what we have these 7 points. The first one is that we will have better module selection to start with, and it means that we're going to spend less time looking for modules and installing them. The second point is that all projects. All projects we do will have to be responsive, and we will have to think in a responsive way from the very beginning. Third point, third prediction, we will have to create better structured markup. It has to be lean, it has to be well structured, and Twig is going to be a very good tool to take this kind of approach. Fourth point, that Symfony will make the Drupal's code more accessible to experienced developers from the outside of our community. And this means that we can grow the community faster, we can have access to a wider talent pool. This is a major advantage. Prediction number 5, Backbone.js will make it much, much easier to create very dynamic, modern, responsive, reactive interfaces. And we will be able to create really, really cool functionality with this. Number 6, configuration management is going to solve deployment. And so this means that for the DevOps, it means that you're going to stop, complaining about Drupal and about features not reverting and that kind of thing. It's just going to work. This is amazing. Finally, with different projects, we are going to need to change not only the code rewrite, but also the way that we work with the code. All the processes, the human processes that go around, that goes along with the code. And I think that we see that, no matter when you raised your hand at the beginning, no matter what you do with Drupal, Drupal 8 is going to change the way you work in a way or another. And I think that Drupal 8 will make us better at what we do. And when we're good at what we do, we're more motivated. Who here thinks that being motivated makes you more productive? Yeah, good. Who here thinks that being productive makes you more motivated? Okay, what's not to like about that? So I told you I would have 7 points. I went through 7 points. Now I have a question. Before my question, there's one big question that everybody is asking. This question is, when is Drupal 8 finally going to be ready? A lot of people ask me this question. And somehow they expect me to know the answer. And I don't know. There are some predictions, but I couldn't really say. But I have another question for you. One that I think it's much more important and much more relevant. When are you going to be ready for Drupal 8? And being ready, in this case, what does it mean? Being ready means being familiar with the new tools that we have at our disposal. It means being familiar with the new way of thinking that we need to use these tools. Being familiar with all the processes that go along with these tools. And if for Drupal 7, you've made it to the top of the learning curve, you are an expert, you know what you're doing. If you had to switch to Drupal 8 today, you would probably go back before the big bump. At least for me, this is how it is. And I think that it would be the same for you too. And it's going to take some effort. It's going to take some effort to get back on top and to become experts again. And this, it's not about waiting for Webform or 5-star or whatever module you need to be ready for Drupal 8. This is really about getting up to speed with a new way of thinking. And all these solutions that I talked about, they're part of Drupal 8, but they're not completely new. These are all things that you can already start using today on your Drupal 7 project. And so you already have the possibility to get ready. And what better place is there to become ready than a conference like this? Here you have the opportunity not only to learn about the software, but really to talk to the people who use the software, to exchange ideas about how you use the software, to exchange, how you want to do things in a better way. And this is really, the best way to get up to speed about a new way of thinking about the software we use. So get ready, because Drupal 8 is coming. It's coming soon. It's coming faster than we expected. And I mentioned in the title of this presentation, it's going to change the way we work. I think that's pretty obvious by now. But when I've been talking to the people here this weekend at this conference, we see that it's not only work, it's also a passion. And Drupal 8 has the potential to make us happier, to make us more motivated, more productive. And really, if we look at it, what's not to like about it? Because it has the potential of changing our lives. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Florian. Any questions, maybe? Okay, let me just give him the mic.
So thank you for this great overview. I wanted to ask about the learning curve. Is it really that we're gonna start at the beginning again? Or my perception would be that for developers maybe, but I think as a site builder, would we really need to start over again?
I don't think so. I think there are definitely things that are going to be different. And if we just look at some of the new modules that are available, it works in a slightly different ways. We have new tools at our disposal. So I think that there's going to be something new. It's not like we need to learn everything from scratch. But I think that for everyone, there's going to be something new to learn. So for you, it might be getting familiar with Symfony. For other people, it might be getting familiar with how the new Views interface works and where these new options are coming from and that kind of things. So I think that for everyone, there's a little bit of work that needs to be done. But I think this is also something that will change on a case-by-case basis, because some people have already been working with the latest Drupal 8 backports, like the breakpoints module, the picture module. That it works exactly the same way in Drupal 7 as in Drupal 8, but not everybody has been using it so far.
Any question? Okay, I guess no questions. Okay. Thank you, Florian, and a big applause for him. So stay with us until the session ends, and we'll be here at 2:30 p.m. for a closing session. And until then, still the Twitter prize is on. So the most retweeted tweet wins, and the prize is worth $420. So it's still a secret now. So please tweet and make the Twitter wall in the lobby explode. Thank you.